What's up, guys? Welcome back to Inside Out Precision. As usual, before we get started, if you want some good merch and support the channel, head on over to InsideOutPrecision.com. We got all kinds of hats, t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, decals, and it's a good way to help support the channel, which helps us bring you content. We got some things in the works, and yeah, we appreciate all the support. And look good, shoot good, right? So today's video is going to be on aiming better, but more specifically how to change the way your bow holds and aims. There's really three things that you can do. We're going to kind of go like most popular to least popular. The first is going to be your stabilizer setup. So this is my target bow here. I've got a 30-inch front bar with a 12-inch back bar. Changing the angle of that back bar, changing the ratio of weights from front to back is always going to help. Even if you're just running a front bar, like on a hunting setup, try it with 4 ounces, try it with 6 ounces, try it with 8 ounces. You might find that one that helps that bow settle down better and tightens up your groups. There's really no right or wrong in the ratio of weight. Generally speaking, like if you're a newer shooter, I would start with probably 4 or 5 ounces on if you're shooting like a target setup, 4 or 5 ounces on the front bar, and probably 10 or 11 ounces on the back bar. If that feels too heavy and you just can't hold it up, just lighten it up. Go to like 3 and 6. Generally speaking, on these long bar setups, a 1-to-3 ratio is a good place to start. So if you got 1 ounce on the front, you're going to have 3 on the back. But again, it is a totally personal feel. There is no right or wrong. Some guys have more on the front than they have on the back. Generally speaking, in a shorter bar setup, like a hunting setup, if I'm going to run a back bar and a front bar, like let's say I have a 10-inch front and an 8-inch back, I like, I think on my EVL that I had set up for tack, it's got a 14-inch front bar and a 10-inch back bar, and I think I've got something like 9 on the front and 8 on the back, and that's just where it held best for me. But playing with stabilizer weight and length is obviously the easiest way to kind of change the way that bow aims and get that pin to settle down. If you feel like it's aiming pretty well, but you just something just isn't quite right with the grip pressure, one thing you can do is change the position of your D loop. So by moving the D loop, an 1/8 of an inch up or an 1/8 of an inch down, it changes that grip pressure. It's either going to kind of suck the bottom of the grip up into your hand, or it's going to flatten out that grip and let you heel into it more. You don't want to move it like an inch one way or the other, and you want to be careful going lower with it, because if you get too low, you're not going to have enough clearance on your shelf, and you're going to get vein contact in your riser window here. But you can play with moving it up a little bit. Now, obviously, that's going to cause the bow to shoot tail high, so you're going to have to bring that rest up with it, which is why I said you don't want to move it like an inch up. But if you go, raise your nock point an 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch, you will feel a difference. Now, this is definitely going to be for a little more experienced shooters. This isn't, if you just started shooting 2 weeks ago, this is not something I'm going to recommend you start doing, because you don't have a good enough feel of your current setup to really be able to tell any difference. But if you've shot thousands of arrows through the setup you currently have, playing with that nock point a little bit higher or lower will change the way it changes that grip pressure in your hands. Moving it up the string a little bit kind of sucks the bottom of the bow towards you when you draw. So it'll bring the bottom of the grip up into you, almost as if you're shooting a little more high wrist. But it's just something, like I said, again, there's no right answer here. This is going to all be personal feel and preference. But it's amazing how just getting a little more heel pressure into it, or maybe you like a little higher wrist, will change the way that bow aims and holds. Now, you're going to want to play around with that. Don't retune every time. Just shoot it, and you're not so much worried where the arrow's hitting. You're worried about how that pin is sitting and how the bow feels. Once you find that position that you like of that D loop, then you'll go back and tune and go from there. Like I said, if you move that loop up, you're going to eventually have to move your rest up, because as you raise the back of that arrow, it's going to point downhill, so you got to bring the front up to get it to tune. The third thing, and this is not as common, but I've played around with it a little bit, and you can definitely feel a difference, is what we call tiller tuning. So the tiller on a bow is the distance from where the limb pocket hits the riser here to the string. When the tiller is even, like let's say I just bottomed both these limbs out, that means that the tiller is even on my bow. What tiller tuning is essentially backing one limb off more than the other. And again, what this is doing here is changing the leverage on the top and bottom of the bow. And by doing so, this comes down to that grip pressure. So if I back, let's say they're both dead even, maxed out. If I back that top limb off 1.5 turns, it's going to kind of want to flatten out that grip when I draw. If I back the bottom one off, it's going to kind of suck the bottom of that grip up into my hand. I shoot the Crispy Real grip from UltraView, and it's a little more high wrist. It took me a little bit of getting used to. And when I first got it, I was kind of playing with that tiller tuning, figuring out what felt best. But ultimately, I ended up just keeping my tiller even and just getting used to the grip, and it aims really, really well for me. The tricky part about this is two things are going to change. One, it's going to change your knock height. For example, if I back off that top limb, it's going to drop this whole carriage low. So it's going to drop my knock point, which means, once you figure out if it holds better for you there, you're going to have to drop that rest down. Again, you don't want to back this off like 4 or 5 turns. We're talking a half turn, full turn, turn and a half, something like that. And it's not going to be this like night and day difference, but you will feel, like I said, if you're used to shooting the setup you have, you will feel a little bit of difference in that grip pressure. Conversely, if I back off the bottom limb a little bit, it's going to want to suck the bottom of this grip up into my hand a little bit. You can play around with it and see which feels best to you, but you are going to need to retune afterwards. Now, sometimes what I see guys do is they'll tiller tune, and then when they retune, instead of moving the rest up or down, they move their knock point. Well, now it's going to change the way that bow holds because we've moved our knock point, like I was just talking about. You can use all these things in combination, absolutely. It takes a lot of playing around. Like I said, this isn't something that you're going to do if you're a brand new shooter, you've only been shooting for a couple months. This is something that you've got to be really in touch with your equipment, basically, and then you'll be able to feel these just minute little differences. But it doesn't take much at all to get a change in the way that bow will settle down a little bit. Like I said, I'm running an even tiller. If I was to change anything, I would probably back off that top limb a little bit and let the base of this grip kind of push in slightly. And I mean, I don't know how much it actually moves, but it can't be more than a couple degrees. So those are some things you can kind of play with on your bow. Obviously, the other thing that's going to change is I back the limb off is it's going to drop your peak weight a little bit. Not very much. I mean, if I do a turn and a half off my top limb, it might drop it 2 pounds. So if you get to the point where you like the way the bow is holding, but you want your poundage back up to where it was, just leave everything how it is, put your bow in the press, and add a couple twists into each one of your cables here, top and bottom cam, and that will, generally it's about 2 twists per pound. So if you need 2 pounds, you're gonna do 2 twists in the top cable and 2 twists in the bottom. I know some people are gonna say, oh, won't that change your draw length? It might change it like a 32nd of an inch. It's gonna be pretty much imperceivable by the shooter. If I put like 8 or 9 twists in, then you might feel a little more let off and a little change in draw length. But generally speaking, you're not going to notice any difference. So you can play around with those things. Like I said, you will need to retune after you do it. And nothing's going to be extreme. Like, remember, we don't want to move that loop up an inch. We don't want to back off the top limb like 4 or 5 turns. We're just tweaking things a little bit to see if we can get that bow to aim better. Another thing you can do is if you have a bow that has a rotating module and then a draw stop that you match to the module settings. So, for example, like the older Hoyts, up until this year, the Hoyts had, I guess it was the RX3 and below. You had the module that would rotate to, let's say, 29 inches, and then you'd match the draw stop to 29 inches. What you can do is if you want to lower that let off, so for a target setup, generally you don't want real high let off. You want, somewhere in that like 65 to 75, 80%, which 80% is getting pretty high. Most people are in that 65 to 75% range. What you can do is actually leave your, so let's say you're at 29 inches. You can leave your draw stops at 29, but move your modules to 29 and a half. And what that's gonna do is not allow that bow to get all the way into the valley before the draw stops hit. And it'll drastically change your let off. For me, you know, I hold much better with lower let off. Especially on a lower poundage bow. You know, I've got this bow set at like 57 pounds. So if I have like 85% let off mods on that, you know, you're going to be holding very little weight at full draw, and everything gets a lot more touchy when that's the case. You know, with a hunting bow, if I'm shooting 70 pounds, 80% or 85% feels a lot like 75% on this bow. So you kind of match the let off based on your draw weight or your peak weight on that bow. You know, you're kind of Frankensteining stuff when you get to that point, but like I said, it's not going to hurt anything. You don't want to move the draw stops. If I leave the draw module where it is and I move the stop to a longer thing, then it's going to over rotate those cams and you're going to have like 95% let off. And then you kill all your speed. You know, any little torque you have is going to move much easier because there's just no pressure on that string. So leave the draw stops where they are and then lengthen your draw module a little bit. Now on a Matthews, you can't do that because the draw stop is connected to the module. But there are, like some of the Bowtechs have that. I know the Hoyts up until a couple of years ago had that. So there's a lot of options there to play around with. But it's kind of fun to tinker with things, and you know, you'll kind of find that sweet spot where everything's like, oh man, this just feels a lot better. You know, on top of that, playing with draw length, more specifically loop length, it's amazing how that can change your alignment. Like even just, you know, lengthening this like 1/8 of an inch or shortening it 1/8 of an inch will totally change the way that, you know, your shoulders come into alignment at full draw. I actually, when I switched releases, I was shooting a hinge, or the hinge by UltraView. It's got a little bit longer neck on it. And now I'm shooting that Stand Perfects thumb button, and the neck is a lot shorter on it. So I actually had to lengthen this D-loop like almost 1/4 of an inch. I mean, I'm at like 1 inch long on this. I usually shoot right about 3/4 of an inch. But world of difference. Like all of a sudden I didn't feel scrunched up. I was able to get this shoulder down and back and in position, and just made a world of difference in the way that bow felt and the way that it shot. So play with all these things, see what works best for you. If you have any more questions on it, feel free to hit the comment thread below. As usual, thank you for all the support, you guys. We're having a really fun time doing this, and I'm glad that so far it seems like everybody, you know, that I talk to is getting something out of it. So remember to head on over to InsideOutPrecision.com. Check us out on Instagram at inside_out_precision. And until next time, remember, keep them in the middle, and I will see you on the range.